Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Islamic Defense Podcast.
It was at this moment that he knew. He fucked up.
Stop embarrassing yourself.
I'm back to making offline videos again. I know it's been a while. So a lot of people have been asking me to respond to this guy called NateTalks2You. And I originally did not want to make a video on this guy because this guy's arguments are too stupid. And I just didn't want to deal with it. But a lot of people have been requesting me to make this video. And I find it ironic because I actually watched his video a long time ago, and even back then I understood that his videos were quite stupid. So I didn't want to make a response to this, but since a lot of people have been requesting me, I figured why not. So let's take a look and see what he has to say, and then I'll make my response. So basically in the video he tries to make the argument that there are unscientific verses in the Quran, which is itself is fallacious because the Quran is not claiming that it's some kind of scientific book that is describing scientific phenomenon. But regardless, let's see what kind of argument he makes.
However, while that video focused more on the morality of the Quran, this time we'll look at its scientific accuracy, or lack thereof.
Why?
These are the top 10 unscientific Quran verses. Number 10, where milk comes from. While the part of the body where a cow produces milk may seem like common sense, the Quran somehow got the location wrong. It claims that milk comes from their belly, between excretions and blood. It also describes the milk as pure and palatable to the drinkers. Yes, never mind the fact that raw milk can have bacteria, parasites, and viruses in them, and never mind the people who are lactose intolerant, or the fact that it's very common in people of Arab descent. How ironic. Basically, never go to this book for any info on nutrition.
Okay, first of all, this is a lie. The verse actually doesn't say this. This is actually a mistranslation. A lot of people, I think, a lot of translators do translate it like this, but this is a mistranslation. It doesn't. For example, the international translation of the verse says the following: "And indeed, for you in grazing livestock is a lesson. We give you drink from what is in their bellies." You can read about this in Quran 1666. So clearly the verse says, we give you drink from what is in their bellies. Nowhere does it say that milk comes from their bellies. It says that we give you drink from what is in their bellies. Right? So basically here he's committing a false equivalence fallacy. He's trying to equivocate two different arguments that has nothing to do with each other. The argument that we give you drink from their bellies is very different to the argument that we give you drink from what is in their bellies. Okay, because what is in their bellies could be a reference to the process of the digestive process that happens in the bellies of the cows, right? It doesn't necessarily have to mean that milk literally does come from their bellies.
Okay, so let me clarify what I mean. When the verse says milk comes from what is in their belly, it could simply be a reference to the food that the cows eat. So the verse could be saying that milk comes from the food that the cow eats. There is a great video that explains how grass turns into milk inside the cow's body. Here, check it out.
There's a number of different processes that cows go through to turn grass into milk. So a cow has 4 different compartments in its stomach, unlike us who only have one. Cows are called ruminants. So the first compartment of a cow's stomach is called the rumen. When a cow is out in the field grazing grass, she eats all the grass and swallows it half chewed. In the rumen, water and other digestive juices are added to the grass and it begins to break down the grass. This is the first stage of the digestive process. The second part of the cow's stomach is the reticulum. This is where the grass is softened and small wads of grass are formed, which are called cuds. These cuds are where the term "the cow is chewing the cud" comes from. During this process, these cuds are returned to the cow's mouth, where they are chewed between 40 and 60 times every minute. The third part of the stomach is called the omasum, where the cuds are pushed down to the third chamber and the grass is squeezed and pressed and any excess of water is squeezed out of the grass. The final part of the stomach is called the abomasum, and this is where the grass is finally turned into milk. So the grass moves down through the abomasum. The nutrients are absorbed into the bloodstream by the cow. These are the essential nutrients for growth and body function. The other nutrients from the grass goes down through the abomasum and it's directed towards the cow's udder. It's here where there's 4 mammary glands that the cow is able to finally turn the grass into milk. And this is the digestive process which turns grass out in the field into milk, which is a final product.
Also, what is in their bellies cannot be a reference to milk itself, because that wouldn't make any sense. We give you milk from what is in their belly, which is also milk. So basically the verse would be saying we give you milk from milk, which makes no sense. So when the verse says, from what is in their bellies, the most likely explanation is that it's referring to something else like the food that the cow eats which is in their bellies. This is the most likely explanation. However, Allah knows best.
And another thing, nowhere does it say that you have to drink raw milk. I don't know where he got that from. It's just out of nowhere. And nowhere does it say that lactose intolerant people have to drink milk. Like, this is stupid.
Number 9. How birds fly. Aerodynamics? Air pressure? Pfft, that's stupid. The Quran says birds fly because of Allah. Well, I'm sorry Allah, but for an all-powerful being, I think you could do a bit better. Couldn't God have just made the birds self-sufficient? Why would an all-powerful creator make animals that can't function on their own? It seems like a very unintelligent design.
Because you're a fool, with all due respect.
Again, this is a red herring fallacy. None of this has anything to do with the verse. The verse is not describing how birds fly. He's simply describing what he's doing. He's not saying how he's doing it. So this is complete fallacious to say that the verse is describing how birds fly, when in reality the verse is not saying that. Nowhere does it say that how birds fly. It simply says that birds fly because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who causes it to happen, which is true, because if a all-powerful being existed who control every aspect of reality and can bend reality, like for example in Islam we believe that every single thing happens because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who causes it, right? He's the ultimate cause. He's the one who causes everything. So from that point of view, clearly a bird flying is he's doing as well, because he's the one who is making sure that the birds can flap their wings. He's the one making sure that their heart beats properly, right? Because these are not things that a bird can control, or even we can control. Like, can you control your own heartbeat? Of course not. So these are all things that depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's what he's describing. He's describing how he has complete control over creation, and that's all there is to it. Like, he's not describing how he's doing it. So saying that this verse is describing how birds fly is again a complete misrepresentation. That's not what the verse is saying. The verse is simply saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing it. He's not explaining how he's doing it. For example, let me explain this with an analogy, right? Imagine if I said that I'm gonna upload a video on YouTube. Now, does that mean that I'm literally going to take a video and then upload it on this platform called YouTube? No, of course not. What I'm simply doing is using a metaphor to describe a process. I'm simply saying what I am doing, but I'm not explaining how exactly it happens. Okay, there's a difference between the two things. Me saying what I'm doing is different to how it happens. Okay, like for example, I'm obviously not actually taking videos and then uploading them to physically uploading them to YouTube. No, what I'm doing is I'm simply clicking typing and clicking a bunch of buttons, and that is causing these algorithms and whatnot to upload my videos to this platform. But obviously I cannot express it like that. That wouldn't make any sense. So I have to simplify it or use a metaphor. In this case, the metaphor being I'm uploading videos on YouTube. The Quran is doing the same thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is simply describing what he's doing, but he's not describing how he's doing it. I hope this is clear, but regardless, let's continue.
Number 8. How ships float. Since the writers of the Quran couldn't wrap their heads around how birds can fly, it shouldn't be a shock they didn't know how ships float either. In the book, ships float not due to buoyancy, but because of, you guessed it, Allah. Remember everyone, if you don't know how shit works, just say God did it.
Again, this moron doesn't understand what ultimate cause is. So basically what he's doing is he's using a logical fallacy known as oversimplified cause fallacy. So this fallacy is basically a type of fallacy where you kind of create a false dilemma, where you have a bunch of causes or complex process that happens, and you simply take one of those causes and says that either this is the cause or it's not. Okay, and you kind of create this false dilemma, but in reality the process is a lot more complex than that. But just because someone is simplifying it and using a metaphor to explain it to the audience doesn't mean that the statement is false or wrong. So again, this is fallacious. Like for example, imagine if I said that, for example, so this is like Sheldon Cooper level logic, right?
Bazinga!
Like, so this science bros, these people, they think that everything has to be explained scientifically, but in reality that's not the case. Like for example, we never explain anything scientifically. Like for example, if I say that I'm cooking rice, it's simply saying what I am doing, right? Now imagine if I said, oh, when I put the rice in the water, how it's gonna break down all the chemical components, how it's gonna change the cell of the rice, and blah blah blah. Obviously I'm not gonna go into all that detail because that's gonna be useless. Like what point would that be if I just started saying that? I have to write an entire essay to explain that I'm just cooking rice. What would be the point of that? It makes no sense. So the fact that these people take this like simple statements from the Quran and then somehow overanalyze it to make it seem like somehow it's trying to describe some kind of scientific process, when in reality it's not describing some kind of scientific process. And this is also fallacious, and because this is basically a non-sequitur fallacy, it doesn't follow. Just because the Quran is saying how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, how He is the cause of everything in existence, doesn't mean that this has to be this is some He's trying to describe some kind of scientific process. It doesn't mean that He's saying how it happens. He's simply saying what He does. He's not saying how it happens.
Number 7. Bring back the dead. Before the invention of things like the defib, it seems they had a very different method for reviving people. One part of the Quran tells the story of slaughtering a cow, and then using part of that cow's body to bring a man back to life.
Like, what's the argument here? Okay, here he's committing the appeal to extreme fallacy. So basically he's taking an extreme example, which in this case is a miracle, and then he's using that and then generalizing it and acting as if like this miracle is not a miracle and this is the norm, when in reality it's not a norm, it's an exception. So basically this event of the verse took place at the time of Moses, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to show the people of Bani Israel a kind of a miracle, right? And obviously this is not going to happen every time you do it. So basically what he's doing is that he's taking a reasonable argument and taking it to the extreme. I mean, it is completely reasonable to say that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists and He is all powerful, then He can bring dead people back to life. It's not unreasonable. However, that doesn't mean that He'll do it every single time. Okay, I mean, Him doing this at the time of Moses was a miracle. Like I said, He's not describing some kind of natural phenomenon. So Him trying to act as if like this is describing some kind of natural phenomenon is fallacious. So basically what he's doing is he's taking an exception or a miracle and then using that and then generalizing it and acting as if like these miracles are not an exception, which is again fallacious. Regardless, let's continue.
6. Dead birds can fly. As if the Quran couldn't get any more bizarre, this book has zombie birds in it too. Allah tells Abraham to take 4 birds and cut their bodies into pieces, scatter their body parts over mountaintops, and then call the birds back. They will swiftly come to him.
Again, if an all-powerful being like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, then yes, he can bring dead birds back to life. It's not unreasonable, and you have just acting as if like this sounds strange doesn't mean it's not possible. It is very logically possible. So what's your argument here? You don't have an argument, dude. Regardless, let's continue.
Number 5. The moon emits light. A word of advice to any science majors out there. If you're studying for an exam, this is the last book you want to use. In the Quran, the moon is described as being a light. Not reflected light, but literally a light itself.
That just makes no fucking sense. I mean, it's just bullshit.
However, this isn't the only thing they say about the moon.
Alright, this guy's a jahil moron. Anyway, so again, here he's committing the red herring fallacy. The Quran says the following: and made the moon therein a light, and made the sun a burning lamp. Nowhere does it say what kind of light the moon is emitting. Okay, it doesn't say whether it's reflected light, and it also doesn't say whether it's its own light. It doesn't say anything. So taking this verse and then acting like this is somehow describing some kind of scientific process is extremely dishonest, because the verse is a simple verse. It's not trying to say anything in kind of scientific process or anything. So this is extremely dishonest on his part. But you know what? Let's say for the sake of argument he's right? Let's give it to him. Let's say that this is a kind of like this. Let's accept his like stupid, absolute, literal interpretation. Okay, he's still wrong. The Quran is still right, because believe it or not, the moon actually does emit its own light.
Science!
I know I'm probably blowing your mind right now, but that's actually true. The moon actually does have its own light. As a matter of fact, every single thing in the universe has its own light. It's not visible light, but it's still light. As a matter of fact, everything that is hot or that has heat has a type of light. For example, Sven Nielsen, who is a student of physics at the University of Aarhus, shared on Quora, actually shared a picture of the moon emitting infrared light. Now this picture is from NASA during solar eclipse. Here you can clearly see the moon emitting infrared light without any sunlight. And he said the following: yes, everybody that has a temperature emits light. Only in the case of the moon, it is not visible light, but infrared light. The surface of the moon is about 400 K when the sun has heated it. When the sun is eclipsed by the earth, you can get an infrared image of the moon like the one below. At least some of the light in that image is moon's own light. So here you can clearly see that the moon is emitting its own light without any sunlight, which is quite amazing, because before we always heard this argument that, you know, moon doesn't emit its own light, when in reality it does. It does emit its own light. We just can't see it with naked eye, at least. And also another professor also said the same thing, and he's actually a professor of physics, and he said the following: the answer is yes, in two different ways of interpreting what you mean. First, everything made of matter contains charged particles, most notably the electrons of its atoms. These atoms are also in motion due to their temperature, and nothing can have zero temperature. So the electrons are in motion too. They accelerate, and this causes them to emit energy in the form of electromagnetic waves, excitations in the electromagnetic field. In other words, they glow. The wavelengths get long for colder objects and the light ceases to be visible in our eyes. But it is still there. Though some people use the term light for only visible light, so every material object has its own light. It is glowing. Second, there's a different way for me to understand what you mean by something having its own light, because there is another way in which objects give off light. The black body spectrum is a result of the atoms oscillating. But the electrons around the atom can give off light themselves under the right circumstances, mostly if they are bumped from their usual energy level by either high temperature or some other light with enough energy. As they fall back to their usual place, they give off the extra energy as light, sometimes visible, sometimes UV or IR. This is called an atomic spectrum. So each object is giving off light of its own all the time, depending on its temperature, and each kind of thing has its own unique light that it shows under the right circumstances. Both could be seen having its own light. Now, as a matter of fact, the moon actually heats up the planet. Believe it or not, there's actually New York Times articles about it. Here you can check that out. So as you guys can see, first of all, this is a misrepresentation. He is attacking something that has nothing to do with the verse, and he is committing the red herring fallacy because he using this argument as if like it is somehow related to the topic, when in reality it's not related to the topic or the verse. So this is just fallacious, and even if we accepted his stupid interpretation, he's still wrong. Regardless, let's continue.
Number 4. The moon was split in two. At the very beginning of chapter 54 in the Quran, it says the moon was amazingly split in two. Why did this happen? Well, according to the Hadith, the people of Mecca requested that Muhammad show them a miracle. So Muhammad was like, okay, there's the moon split in half. Now, if this event actually occurred, you would think there'd be some scientific evidence supporting it, and you would think there'd be tons of documentation from other cultures recounting this event. But there...
No, that is not true. Again, here he's committing the logical fallacy known as argument from ignorance. Just because we don't have either scientific or historical evidence for something doesn't mean that thing didn't happen. Because the thing is, what the hadith is describing is based on witness testimony, and this is not just any witness testimony. This is like mutawatir tradition, which means that this is something that has been witnessed by multiple different people from completely different spectrums. Okay, so this is not like just some kind of hearsay. We know who these people are. We have a chain of transmission that we can falsify, and if we look at that falsified version, we see that multiple different people from multiple different chains all saying the same thing. That itself proves that this is something that happened. For example, let's do a thought experiment. Let's say that we lived in a time before the invention of Big Bang, or the Big Bang theory. If we follow Nate's logic, which is that we have scientific and historical evidence for everything, then we would actually be forced to believe that the Big Bang never happened, because back then scientists did not have any evidence to say that, you know, the Big Bang theory or the big expansion or whatnot ever took place. They had no reason to believe that. And if we take Nate's philosophy or Nate's logic and we go back in time and we completely forget about all the knowledge that we acquired in the future, in current times, then we would actually be forced to believe in the false idea that Big Bang never happened. So we would actually be forced to believe in something false if we follow Nate's logic or Nate's philosophy or his metaphysics. So his theory that we have scientific evidence for or historical evidence for everything is absolutely false. If that was the case, then we would never have scientific discoveries to begin with. Also, it's very much possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the moon split in such a way that it left no trace. It's very much possible. Now again, as I explained, this is already based on evidence. I mean, there are oral testimonies for this. So if Nate wants to deny this, he actually needs to bring evidence. So far, he has not brought any evidence. Instead, he's trying to do this shifting the burden of proof fallacy, when in reality the burden of proof is on him. He needs to prove that this didn't happen. These people did not see the moon being split in half, when in reality they have seen it. So he needs to provide evidence that this didn't happen. If he cannot, then he needs to accept it, or he has to show reason as to why he thinks it didn't happen. Now the same thing is with historical evidence. Historical evidence gets lost, or sometimes it's not even recorded. For example, let's do another thought experiment. Here is a bunch of archaeological discovery. Take this city hall that was discovered, for example. How come the historians didn't have any historical writings or evidence of this ancient hall? And this hall is like 2,500 years old or something, and you're telling me that no archaeologist or historians ever found any evidence for it? Why? I mean, I thought everything was written down. What, did the historians forgot to write it? I thought everything was written down. So how did this happen? How are we discovering new things in 2020? If everything is written down, then we shouldn't be able to do that. I mean, if all of history is recorded, then clearly we would never find any new we would never make any new archaeological discoveries. Again, if we take Nate's theory that everything is recorded, and then we go back in time in 2010, then again we'd be forced to believe that this city hall never existed. So we would be forced to believe in something false. So Nate's theory is actually leading us to a bunch of false things multiple times. So his theory that we have historical and scientific evidence for everything is absolutely false. But regardless, let's continue.
Number 1. Where semen comes from. And now, ladies and infidels, according to the Quran, semen comes from between backbone and ribs. Wow, that is impressively wrong. You need to move a little lower.
Again, this is a straw man argument. Nowhere does the verse say that where semen comes from. It doesn't even say semen anywhere. It says that it is created from an ejected fluid. The verse says, he was created from a fluid ejected emerging from between the backbone and the ribs. You can read about this in Quran 86, 6-7. Also here he is committing the ambiguity fallacy. There's a lot of different type of liquids that pass between the backbone and the ribs. It's not clear what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to here. A lot of different type of nutrients and proteins pass through between this backbone and ribs that are necessary for a human baby to grow, or the growth of the baby. As a matter of fact, one of the most important hormones called follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, or luteinizing hormone, LH, that are necessary for the female egg to develop or for conception, it actually travels from the brain to the female egg, passing this backbone and ribs. And there is actually a video by Crash Course that actually explains this process.
Around puberty, the hypothalamus and pituitary set up two concurrent cycles: the ovarian cycle in the ovaries, which ripens eggs and secretes sex hormones, and the menstrual or the uterine cycle, which prepares the uterus to capture and nourish any mature fertilized eggs. When puberty begins, the hypothalamus starts up the ovarian cycle by secreting gonadotropin-releasing hormone about once a month. This is a sex hormone that stimulates the anterior pituitary to release two more hormones: follicle-stimulating hormone, you'll often hear it called FSH, and luteinizing hormone, or LH. The follicle-stimulating hormone lives up to its name by stimulating the growth of a follicle, but only one, the one that happens to be the furthest along in development at the time. The FSH drives that one lucky follicle to keep growing by triggering the follicle itself to secrete its own estrogen hormones, which locally signal the follicle to mature even more. That surge of follicle-secreted estrogen then ends up stimulating the pituitary to secrete another pulse of luteinizing hormone to finish the job. The LH gets to work on the oocyte that's been dormant inside the follicle and triggers it to finally start dividing again, getting it to complete meiosis 1 and move on to metaphase 2. This whole process takes about 14 days, at the end of which the follicle, which is now mature, pushes up against the ovary wall, ruptures, and with the help of enzymes breaches the wall and ejects a single, now mature oocyte. Congratulations! You've just ovulated! The damaged follicle now slows its estrogen production while morphing into a different structure called the corpus luteum, which eventually degenerates. But first, it releases its final hormonal swan song, a bunch of progesterone, a little bit of estrogen, and some inhibin that together stop the release of FSH and LH. They also prepare the uterus to receive the oocyte, which is now on its way down a fallopian tube where it might meet a nice young sperm. The tubes are about 10 centimeters long, and interestingly, they aren't actually connected to the ovaries. This means that when the egg pushes through the ovary, it has to float a short way through the peritoneal cavity before it's caught up by a fallopian tube. Now, only if and when an egg fuses with a sperm does it actually complete meiosis 2 and officially become an ovum.
So it could be that the Quran is actually referring to this process, but it's just using a metaphor or a simple analogy to describe this. And inshallah, I'll make a separate video for this, because I know that Brother Asadullah Ali made a kind of like a very lengthy article for this. And I do plan on making kind of like a review or response to that. So look out for that. Inshallah, I'll come later. But regardless, let's see what else this guy has to say.
According to verse 43:11, rain is caused not by that ridiculous water cycle of evaporation, condensation, and precipitation. Nope, it's all because of Allah.
Again, this is oversimplified cause fallacy. He is oversimplifying it. Obviously, the verse is in the verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is simply saying what he is doing, not how he is doing it. Regardless, let's continue.
Number 2. The sky. According to several verses in the Quran, the sky is a ceiling. Some translations call it a canopy, a tent, or dome, but point being, they all describe it as being some kind of solid covering. What are the odds that people who wrote a book far before the invention of space travel wouldn't really comprehend how the atmosphere works? Now, some people may argue that the sky being a ceiling is simply a metaphor, but further on, the Quran also claims that the sky can be stripped away. It's hard to believe the Quran is being metaphorical when they continue to imply the sky is literally a covering.
Yeah, but Nate, you do the same thing. You also use the same metaphor over and over again. Does that mean that you actually mean them literally? For example, in your video you said that Quran can talk like people.
One part of the Quran tells a story.
Then you said that books can have perspective, or the Quran have perspective.
Last year we examined the book's, let's say, unique perspective on topics like
Now, any sane person who listens to you say that will interpret that to mean as a metaphor, right, or a parable, right? However, if we follow your logic, then you actually mean them literally, since you are using the same metaphor over and over again. Does that now mean that you actually think that the Quran or books are conscious or they're sentient? Does that mean that you think that books can talk and can have perspective on things? What's going on, Nate? Why are you such an unscientific moron? Again, this is clearly a non sequitur fallacy. The argument doesn't follow. Just because a metaphor is being used multiple different times does not mean that that now all of a sudden turns into a literal thing. Like, a metaphor is still a metaphor, no matter how many times it's used. Just because it's used multiple times doesn't mean that metaphor now all of a sudden magically becomes a literal thing. It just doesn't follow. Regardless, let's continue.
First of all, the fact that the verse 2:22 is referring to an analogy can be proven by the verse itself. The verse says how the sky is a canopy or ceiling, and how Allah Almighty brings down rain from it. Now obviously a canopy or ceilings don't rain water down on us. So how can the sky be a ceiling when it also rains water? Clearly the verse is not saying that the sky is a literal ceiling. Even a 2-year-old child can understand this. Now if you think about it, it could be a reference to our atmosphere, as our atmosphere protects us from sun's radiation and other things. Also there are countless hadith of the night journey which all says how the Prophet ascended to the heavens. In Islam we believe that the first heaven encompass the earth and are above the earth. The second and third heavens are all above the earth. Some of the hadith describes how the Prophet visited second and third heaven, which means he was high above the earth. The hadiths also describe how Isa or Jesus will descend at the end times to kill Dajjal. So how can both the Prophet ascend to the heavens which is above earth, and how can Jesus descend from heaven, if the sky is a literal ceiling? Nate, next time use your brain. These are matters of the unseen. Obviously this is not describing some physical or material objects. The same way the sky is not a literal ceiling.
Number 3. Human lifespan. The story of Noah's Ark isn't only in the Bible, it's part of the Quran too. But did you know that apparently Noah lived to be 950 years old? I call bullshit.
Again, here he is using argument from ignorance. If we use this logic and go back to the 10th century, then we would be forced to believe that things like bacteria didn't exist. Which means your theory that we have scientific or historical evidence for everything is false. Again, just because we don't have any evidence of Noah living for such a long period of time does not mean that he didn't actually live for such a long period of time. We know very little about history, okay? We know very little about what actually happened in history. And just because we don't have any evidence, historical evidence for something, does not mean that thing is impossible or it never happened, okay? So again, this is completely fallacious. Now the thing is, if you use this logic and say that only things that we have evidence for are things that exist, then you actually, and if you take that logic back to the past, you will be forced to believe in a lot of false things. For example, you would be forced to believe that Big Bang is false because it was never discovered. You would be forced to believe that atomic theory is false because it was never discovered, or we had no scientific or historical evidence for it. So your metaphysics is false, my dude. Again, word of advice, Nate, change your metaphysics. I have literally destroyed your dumb scientism based metaphysics 2 times now. Next time, get a better metaphysics. But regardless, let's continue.
Number 4. Horses. According to verse 16:8, Allah made horses for transportation. However, what they fail to mention is that the very first horses could not be ridden. It was not until...
I swear to God, this is like that kind of Sheldon Cooper level logic. Here again, he's committing the argument from ignorant fallacy. How do you know that the very first horses couldn't be ridden? I mean, were you there? How do you know this? Just because we don't have evidence for it doesn't mean that other possibilities are completely out the window. Also, if we take your logic that we have scientific and historical evidence for everything, and I again send you to the 7th century and erase your memory of dinosaurs, would you then conclude that dinosaurs don't exist? Because back then, they didn't have evidence for dinosaurs. There was no historical or scientific evidence for dinosaurs. So would you believe that dinosaurs didn't exist? Because it was first discovered in the 16th century. So again, you'd be forced to believe something that is false. If you actually continue to believe this metaphysical idea that we have scientific and historical evidence for everything, and we can know what is true and what is false based on either scientific or historical evidence, when in reality we can't. It's just not enough. We don't have enough information. And this is why this is fallacious, right? This is an argument from ignorance. This is not some kind of evidence of absence. This is not the case where we have searched everywhere on planet Earth and we know everything about history of all time. We have all knowledge. And then you say that something happened and we don't find evidence of that. That's different. But that's not what we're talking about. We know little to nothing about the planet's history. So this is extremely arrogant. And again, I've been smashing his metaphysical belief like over and over again. This is like fourth time I'm doing this. Again, this is like the fourth time I've destroyed your metaphysics or your religion, scientism, religion. So again, get a better metaphysics. Also, just because early people didn't ride horses doesn't mean they were never meant to be ridden. I mean, what kind of logic is that? For example, in the early days, people didn't know how to cook vegetables. According to historians, they supposedly figured it out like 170,000 years ago. I mean, does that mean that vegetables were never meant to be eaten? What are you talking about? No, it just means that people haven't figured out how to eat them. That doesn't mean that they were not created or evolved, if you like, to be eaten. Even in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes how he taught people, right? For example, in the verse 96, 4-5, it says, "Who taught by the pen, taught man that which he knew not." So just because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this world for us to use, that doesn't mean we will always know what to do with it, or we will have the knowledge to know what to do with it, right? Same with horses. That's because we didn't know what to do with horses doesn't mean they were not created for us. Because in Islam, we believe that everything other than humans, or that all the animals are created to serve us so that we can make use of it. Okay, that's what we believe. Whether we ride them, it doesn't matter. They're literally created for us. Even if we don't know what to do with them, it's still true that they're created for us. So like,
now, we've understood for quite a while now that humans evolved from ape-like ancestors. So, with the Quran being a perfect book, it must have numerous verses documenting this evolution. Right? Nope. Instead, we get verse after verse about humans being made from clay.
Again, this is appeal to extreme fallacy. This is talking about Adam alayhi salam and how he was created from clay. And this is again another extreme example or a miracle. So this is an exception, this is not the rule. Like, not all human beings are created from clay. It's only Adam alayhi salam who was created from clay. So he's using this exception and trying to make it seem like it's the norm, but in reality it's not the norm. Only Adam alayhi salam is the one who was created from clay. So you cannot use this as an example, as a rule to say that Quran is unscientific somehow. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is simply describing a miracle that he did to bring Adam alayhi salam to come to life. This has nothing to do with science, because miracles are outside the realms of science, because science is based on material things, and this is beyond that.
Number 6. Male and female. According to multiple verses, Allah created everything in pairs, meaning male and female. Well, while this may be true for many organisms, it's not true for all of them. For example, some species of whiptail lizards are all female.
Again, strawman argument fallacy. Nowhere does the Quran say that everything is created in pairs. These verses simply refer to different type of pairs of creation. For example, if you read the verse 36 and later verses and others, you can clearly see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about opposing things, like a pair of different type of things, right? For example, a different type of plants, male or female, day and night, sun and the moon, good and evil, etc. For example, Imam Tabari said the following regarding verse 51-49. He said, there was a difference of opinion concerning the word we have created pairs. Some scholars said that what is meant by it is we have created two different types of everything, such as misery and happiness, guidance and misguidance, etc. Mujahid said, disbelief and faith, misery and happiness, guidance and misguidance, night and day, heaven and earth, and male and female. Others said what is meant by pairs is male and female. The view that is more likely to be correct is the view of Mujahid, which is that everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created, he created a counterpart to that. that is different from it in some cases, so that each is an opposite or counterpart of the other. Hence, he said, we have created pairs. In other words, Allah is drawing attention to his might and power to create whatever he wills, and that he is not like created things which do one type of action and do not do the counter of that action. Because anything that can do one thing but not the other, because everything can do one thing and not the other. For example, fire, which can only heat and cannot cool, or ice, which can only cool and cannot heat. It cannot be described as perfect. Rather, perfect and utmost praise is due only to the one who is able to do all of that he wills of things that are different or similar. You can read about this in Tafsir al-Tabari 22, 430 to 440. But regardless, let's continue.
27. A man named Solomon comes upon a valley of ants, and one ant says,
O nation of ants, go into your dwellings because Sulaiman is coming with his army. He'll probably trample over you without even knowing what has happened. You know, it amazes me. I have sat and watched ants very, very carefully.
Do I even have to refute this one? Ants cannot communicate through speech.
Again, strawman argument. Nowhere in the verse does it say that ants are communicating through speech. Okay? Prophet Sulaiman could understand the speech of animals. Again, this is a miracle, an exception, because that was a gift or a miracle that was granted to him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That doesn't mean everyone can understand animal language. This was an exception. Nowhere does it say that they were using like human speech. However, the message of their communication was relayed to us. That's it. Obviously, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what they're saying. For example, there's a video where it says that, did you know that there is a talking gorilla? Now, it's an ad of a documentary of a woman, of the first woman who taught gorillas sign language. Now, one could say that she was talking to gorillas. However, that's not going to be some kind of unscientific statement. It's simply a metaphor or a parable to explain the fact that she could communicate with gorillas. Okay? Same with Sulaiman alayhi salam. Now, let's turn the tables, right? So, since Nate likes to use this kind of like Sheldon Cooper level logic, where he thinks that everything needs to be scientifically accurate, let's see how scientifically accurate his own video is, right? Let's take a look at this. So check this out. So I've actually gathered a bunch of clips where he says some very unscientific things. Let's take a look at this. So first, he says that aerodynamics can be stupid just like people. So he thinks aerodynamics behaves like people. It's conscious. That's what he thinks. Here, check it out.
Aerodynamics? Air pressure? Pff, that's stupid.
Did you hear what he said? He said aerodynamics and air pressure are stupid. How can aerodynamics and air pressure be stupid? Nate, they're not people. People can be stupid. Environment cannot be stupid. This is a very unscientific thing to say, Nate. For example, in another place, he says that anatomy can be a suit. Here, check it out.
Whether it be cows or human beings, anatomy is clearly not the Quran's strong suit.
Did you hear that? Anatomy is not the Quran's strong suit. So he thinks that Quran wears suit like people. What's wrong with this guy? This guy's jahil. Why do you believe such stupid things, such unscientific things, Nate? This makes no scientific sense. It's completely unscientific. Then, at one point, he says that books can have birds in them. Here, check it out.
As if the Quran couldn't get any more bizarre, this book has zombie birds in it too.
Did you hear that? He said Quran has zombie birds in it. So he literally thinks that the Quran, which is a book, can have literal physical birds inside it. I mean, this is... Are you stupid, Nate? What's wrong with you? Are you a moron? This is completely unscientific. What are you talking about? Then he says that books can have perspective like people. Here, check it out.
Last year we examined the book's, let's say, unique perspective on topics.
Did you hear that? He said the book's unique perspective. So he thinks that books can have perspective like people. So what now? Are you gonna say that books watch movies next like people? Are you a moron, Nate? Why do you believe such stupid things? This is completely unscientific. Regardless, let's see another thing. He said that ideas can produce sounds. He thinks that ideas can talk like people. This is the kind of moron we're dealing with. Here, check it out.
Come to think of it, a lot of things in the Quran sound like the ignorant but vivid ideas of a child.
Sounds like ignorant but vivid ideas. So he thinks that ideas can have sounds. I hate to break this to you, Nate, but ideas don't have sounds. They cannot speak. It's physically impossible, scientifically impossible. You're an idiot, Nate. But then he says that love is a liquid that can literally be showered on people. Here, what's this?
Then I was showered with love and tolerance from the religion of peace.
Did you hear what he said? I was showered with love and tolerance. How can you be showered with love and tolerance? Is it some kind of liquid? No. Love and tolerance is not some kind of physical thing. It can't be showered on you. Nate, it's unscientific. What are you talking about? You're an idiot. Then he says something even more stupid. He says that people can wrap their heads, like Luffy, Monkey D. Luffy from One Piece. Here, check it out.
Since the writers of the Quran couldn't wrap their heads around how birds can fly.
Did you hear that? He says that writers of the Quran couldn't wrap their head around. So he thinks that people can literally wrap their head around things. I mean, are you insane, Nate? People are not made of rubber, okay? They can wrap their head around things. It's impossible. Again, completely unscientific.
Hello everyone. Sorry about cutting off, but my phone ran out of charge. Either way, my point is, if we use Nate's own logic and interpret Nate's own video, then we get some absurd and stupid conclusions. Obviously any sane person can understand that this is not what Nate means. He is using a simple parable or a metaphor. The same way Quran is using simple parables and metaphors. Then why is Nate interpreting the Quran like this? Obviously Allah Almighty is not trying to give us exact knowledge of how things work in nature. In some cases he does, however not in these cases. This is also not how science works. You cannot apply science to understand normal and figurative speech, especially the Quran. This is nothing but a misrepresentation. This is the most dishonest and stupid way you can interpret a religious text. This shows either lack of intelligence or dishonesty on part of Nate. Nate, if you have any human decency, next time don't make these stupid arguments. Go and talk to an actual Islamic scholar or a student of knowledge already. Especially before you make videos about Islam. You not only made yourself look stupid, you made the whole atheist community look stupid. Also, if you continue to make these stupid illogical arguments, then inshallah we'll also use them against you. We'll also call out your so-called scientific inaccuracies in the most dishonest way possible. The same way you do. My message to you, Nate, is get some knowledge and stop relying on materialism to know what's true. I have destroyed and smashed your false religion and philosophy. This is not how you can know whether something is true or not. I humbly request you to talk to an Islamic scholar and learn, and then read the Quran with an open mind. Try to understand what your creator is actually saying, instead of misrepresenting it. May Allah guide you. With this I want to end the video. If you like this, like, share and subscribe. Also inshallah this video will premiere early on my Patreon, so my Patreons may see this video early. So if you want to see my videos early, then join my Patreon. With this I want to end this video. Jazakallahu Karen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.